Hello, I'm Andy Hodges. I'm now joined by Professor Hubert Gijzen. He is Professor of Environmental Biotechnology, Institute for Water Education. Professor, thank you for talking to me. Most appreciated. Now, of course, we are here at the expert group meeting under UNECA, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, looking at leveraging energy resources for a just energy transition in Southern Africa and exploring the options and challenges, as well as, of course, looking at financing climate action and a just energy transition in Southern Africa. Professor, I know you've looked at this field, you're an expert in this area. Talk to me about the actual issues, or what Southern Africa can actually do to transition, particularly when most of the economies are effectively fossil fuel run, except possibly for Zambia.
Well, the report that we're discussing here talks about a just transition and emphasis on just, because let's face it, if we look back to the carbon-based economy that started 150 years ago, 160 years ago with oil, fossil fuels, it has not only this time when we realize this caused a lot of climate change impacts and disasters and is ruining the planet, but also it left a major portion of society behind. The carbon-based economy was driven towards those who live in cities, basically. So the rural off-grid that we talk about now were left behind. They were left behind in a catch-22 of stark poverty. And there is almost no way out. Imagine if you live in a rural area, you have no energy. You can't even charge your phone. You don't have digital access. We live in a digital world.
And also even talk about the environmental damage that you're doing by chopping trees to cook and so forth.
That's it. And the implications to all these sectors are that they can't thrive. What it means is that we have this ambitious global agenda of the SDGs. And it means that, again, this segment of the population, the rural off-grid, is left behind completely in the whole SDG agenda. So energy is a key component that needs to be looked at in this SDG. As energy is an SDG in its own right, yeah. But we need to look at it intersectorally. Energy is a sector, but the world is not sectoral, it is intersectoral, the real world. So we need to look at the way energy can be positioned and exploited in a way that it drives other sectors. It drives, if you have energy access in a rural off-grid village, you introduce energy and ICTs, suddenly the school has access to the best high-quality educational material. What a game changer. Huh? The health center has access to remote advice and diagnosis. Via sharing of digital pictures and what have you. So think about a local farmer. The moment you introduce energy, that farmer can pump water, can irrigate. The crop yields go up 3 times at least. Now that farmer needs to reach markets that are further away. Before he might use a bicycle to reach 10 kilometers. Now he needs 30 kilometers. He will be able to now purchase electric carts to bring his produce to the market 20 kilometers further away. So what I'm trying to describe is this trigger that energy can be in a rural off-grid community where it becomes a catalyst for change, for positive change and for SDG advancement.
So you've got, if I can put it into 2 worlds, you've got the rural folk and of course the urban, where the mostly manufacturing, that's where most businesses function, that's where basically I can say the drivers of the economy are, even though of course the rural citizens do play a huge part in the growth of any economy, particularly in Southern Africa. The question then comes is the ability to find the balancing act between the transition. Because of course Zimbabwe, South Africa in particular, are coal-based, fossil fuel-based economies. I think Zambia 85%, and the problem with that of course is the drought, because being completely dependent on hydro and there's a drought year, and they haven't drought-proofed it or put in place strategies, then you're stuck. So the question now is how can anyone expect Southern Africa to grow economically and at the same time reduce the fossil fuels and increase green. And we'll talk about financing a bit later, but how do you find that balance? I mean, what do you think?
Well, actually, you need to recognize that actually there are two agendas playing out at the same time around energy. One is, as you say, in the urban centers where the production and the use of energy, now fossil-based energy, is happening. And where that access to energy over the past 150 years has created a development that we now call not sustainable, unsustainable. So we need to change for reasons of climate change, sustainability, rebalancing nature, economy, and society. That is for the part of society that is currently connected to electricity, has access to energy. But we recognize that we went into a dead-end street. We're now reaching the wall, and in some countries we're still driving high speed. So you can see the crash coming. That is one agenda. So that's basically driven, we just had the COP meetings by the climate change agenda and the realization we need to do it differently. The other agenda is that of poverty. And my statement is that basically we sent those rural off-grid communities into stark poverty because we didn't take care of them in terms of energy access. And of course, access to other services that you find in cities, good education, good health services. So that is an agenda that needs specific attention, and I would say let us use this transition now, this green transformation of Africa, this digital transformation in Africa, and the two going hand in hand. Let us use this as an opportunity for those who are currently connected, so urban and well-off, to get it right and become environmentally sustainable, but also to now fix that problem that we have created in the past, leaving out such a large portion of society, and get it right for them as well.
All right, but that then speaks to what I would call the non-holistic approach to policies and energy policies in the region, the non-integration of those policies, I would say the idea that each Southern African country is doing their own thing when it comes to their energy policies, and some policies are stronger than others. I mean, is that an issue? Do you see that as an issue in terms of anything, us all working together as Southern Africa?
Absolutely. No, of course, most policies are generated in capitals, in parliaments, and so on. So they basically look at the problem from an urbanistic point of view. The issues I refer to in rural off-grid require other policies. In the presentations here in the conference, I hear a lot about policy instruments, about financing modalities. But if you look at them, all of them are to address that first agenda, the transformation to green energy for those who already have energy. We need separate, specific policies to give energy access to those who had never had sustainable energy access, who are not connected to the grid, who don't have electricity. And that requires specific policies, a specific strategy and an action plan. Because otherwise we end up making the transformation towards green energy and waking up next day and saying, oh, hallelujah, we have green energy. And we have again left behind a large portion of society, those who are in deep poverty.
Now, you were involved with UNESCO, and I understand there is a project that they're working on in Zimbabwe which could look at exactly what you're talking about. Maybe just very briefly explain what UNESCO are doing there. I know you're not there anymore, but if you could just briefly explain.
Yeah, I used to be the UNESCO regional director for SADC, and at that time, 2 years ago, we designed and started the implementation of a new program that exactly is focused on this second agenda. So looking at the rule of grid, but not as we too often do as development partners. We look at rural off-grid communities as poor, as weak. They need help. We need to give them services, social protection, and so on. I'm not saying that is not needed, but Let's look at the other side of the coin as well. Affordability, and the report mentions this 71 times affordability, but only in one meaning of the word. And that is, energy is too expensive, we need subsidies, we need tax incentives, we need to make energy affordable. The other side of the coin is, let's recognize that these communities are poor. And they have a potential to grow economically. They have enormous economic potential. That is at the heart of this program that we have designed. That is one of the elements. So that is, if you take on board community members and make them actors for change for themselves, rather than a target audience, a victim, a weak person who needs help. So the focus is especially on women and youth in these communities. And we work with community learning centers where we have specific modules where community members can learn specific skills, community TVET. They don't need a degree for a 3 or 4 year program. They need a few weeks hands-on training so that they can set up their own business initiative, set up solar systems for the school, for the health center, later for the community members as well, as income grows.
To empower.
And it is actually empowerment of community members to take their development in their own hands. But now, I talked about a catch-22, without energy, they stay in a catch-22. There is no way out. But energy could be the catalyst to make it happen, together with ICTs and digitization. So also one of the modules in TVET will be setting up Wi-Fi systems and selling equipment. But you see that there's a whole value chain then developing. If I talked about this rural farmer who may now run a pump, can irrigate, can sell as more crops, needs to go further to markets further away, needs an electric cart which he can charge with free energy from his solar panels, which
It's life-changing.
So it is a whole chain. The trigger is renewable energy and ICTs, and the impact is on the whole society, on the income potential, on the business opportunities, on health situation, on education, the quality of education. And what you basically do is you can turn these local off-grid communities into the 21st century overnight.
Well, you say that, but I suppose the elephant in the room is funding of this, financing of it. I mean, you heard the numbers, 109 billion is the financing gap for climate action. 109 billion, only 2.2 billion came into Southern Africa last year, of which most of that went to South Africa and Mozambique. So you have, and then you still have debt distress, of most of the Southern African countries are in huge debt and they're in debt distress. So they don't have the money to be pumping in. They're looking at pumping money into social welfare programs, into housing, into roads, infrastructure. And suddenly they're told, by the way, you need to wipe out your fossil fuel, which may create unemployment, and move to transition to renewable and clean energy. How?
Yeah. Well, the answer was basically given. You need a new business model. You need a business model that looks at the two dimensions of the agenda. In the urban world, where we now use electricity that is fossil fuel, we need to make that transition. But in the rural areas and the off-grid situation, it's not a transition, it's a new opportunity for community members. But the business model must be based on business. That means there is money to be made. And that money be made also by these community members. When that transition happened 150, 160 years ago, the carbon-based economy was built. There was very little attention to inclusivity, equality. So you remember the term oil barons, yeah? So these were local people that suddenly drilled oil and they became
billionaires.
Yeah. the Rockefeller family and so on. You know, they have now big foundations and they're giving to the poor.
Yeah, no, Shell from your...
Shell and BP and all these big companies came up. So
But all on fossil fuel.
yeah. So it was an enormously important era, the development of the fossil fuel.
It was important to the economic growth of the world.
Absolutely.
They needed it.
Yeah.
But of course, it had a huge impact on the environment. That's the problem.
Which kicked in very late. We have been using fossil fuel for 100 years without any comment on the environment. Well, maybe someone shouting in the desert, but in general, that realization wasn't there. That is now there. Now, also there we need a business model. That is and the takeoff point for that business model must be that sustainability is business. There is so many new businesses and business initiatives to be developed from the green transformation. But it can't happen overnight. So you need to think about...
Is that not one of the issues, though, is that there is no time frame on this? It appears as if we all are possibly, and this is just an opinion, coming up with strategies, trying to talk about holistic policies, talking about reducing fossil, but the fact is...
There are time frames. So in the COP discussions, there's always an agenda, there's a time frame, right, by 2030, but that is an agenda on climate change. So the agenda says we want to prevent
1.5%.
that the global warming goes over 2%. And from there you can then translate that into actions and reductions and targets and that's nice for politicians because they like to work with that on their short-term agendas. So it's not that this agenda isn't there, but this agenda, as I said, is one of the two agendas. This one is driven by climate change. And you see how fragile that is. With simply one election in the biggest democracy of this world, we will probably see a stepping back from that agenda. I mean, the announcements have already been made. So this is a hard sell. And there is a lot of opposition from, you could say, the establishment. You mentioned a lot of oil companies.
Profit is profit.
So my take would be, we need to drive this agenda not only from a climate change perspective, but also with a positive message of opportunity. The vast number of business opportunities that can be developed in all sectors if we get this energy right.
Water is what's giving us life in Southern Africa, and that's the future of renewable clean energy going forward. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, it's a very intimate interconnection between water, food and energy. Without energy, no irrigation, very low crop yields. Without energy, no fertilizer. The production of fertilizer is hugely energy intensive. You have to take nitrogen from the atmosphere and break these molecules and make them fertilizer. So energy is key. The relation between energy and water is a dual one. In this region, we use water a lot for energy production as well, hydropower, but we're also faced with climate change and the unreliability of this energy source. But back to the other interaction between energy and water. So we use water massively for irrigation. In fact, 70% of all the water used globally by mankind, 70% goes to the production of our food only. 30% for other uses, for industry, for households, 70% to food. Now, I asked that question. In 2050, we will be 9-10 billion people. Hopefully, many have come out of poverty. We won't have poverty anymore. I'm an optimist. But what happens when people come out of poverty?
They use more.
Their diet shifts towards more meat. Meat has a very high virtual water content. To give you some idea, to produce a kilogram of wheat costs 1 cubic meter of water. To produce 1 kilogram of beef costs between 10 and 15 cubic meters of water. So next time if you go to the butcher and you bring a kilo of beef home, know that you're carrying 15 cubic meters of water. But what I'm getting at is it is impossible for me to see how we will make a balance in 2050 if we don't now start thinking about changing our food security system. We need new food production systems.
Harvesting, people were talking about, because obviously the water table is dropping. I mean, even in Southern Africa.
We're destroying the water resources by overdrawing, but also by polluting, because nice is that we use that water for irrigation, and we have thrown fertilizer and we have thrown pesticides over the crops. And now,
because even the water source is becoming more contaminated.
And more than 90% of that irrigation water drains off to your rivers, to your groundwater. I'm shocked by the very sharp increase in scientific papers in the medical journals on the relation between pesticides and cancer, between pesticides and other diseases. So we see a lot of diseases coming up everywhere in the world. We have no clue where they come from, but we have, since the Green Revolution, we called it the Green Revolution from the 60s onwards, we have introduced so many agrochemicals that are nasty chemical products with severe impacts on our health, not only on our health. We have a few billion other species that also make use of the environment. And what about their health? So, in that sense, we need to look at the bigger picture, at the interactions between water, energy, and food. And I predict that before the end of this century, we will have a food security system that is not based on agriculture, because we can't simply afford it. We're at the end of the dead-end road. We don't
running out of arable land as the population gets more and more and more.
But before that, you will run out of water.
Before we run out of water first.
Yeah.
So, Prof, if I was sitting here, I would, run out in fear screaming. But I'm not going to do that, because obviously it's not doom and gloom, is it? I mean, there is hopefully a way out of this.
There are solutions.
Yeah.
So my field is biotechnology. There's a lot of work ongoing on food security systems. Let's take this example. Already Winston Churchill said in the 30s of the last century, he said, one day we will abandon this insanity of growing a whole chicken only to eat the breast and throw away so much as waste. So he was already, he had a big head, so he was a big thinker apparently. He was already thinking about how can we develop technology to grow that chicken in a suitable medium, and scale it up to a factory. Now, as a young scientist in the 70s, I was doing that technology already. We can grow cells of a chicken breast in a petri dish with a suitable medium. It can grow. Now, think about scaling that up to industrial level. So, with full water recycling now, you will use from now 70% of water use going to food security. You go back to less than 1%.
Yeah. But it also then throws in, I know I'm being a devil's advocate, it also throws in, of course, the labor issues, because you're shifting.
This is just one example. Another is
how we can start using technology or biotechnology to actually give us food rather than the ground.
Another is a very simple example, and there's a lot of programs and projects ongoing. You can grow algae. They use solar energy to produce biomass, protein and nutrients, and algae can be harvested, and then you can process them into all kind of food products. What we need is nutrients, we need protein, we need calories. It's all there. The rest is technology. It can be done.
Just finally, it can be done. I can accept that. Is Southern Africa taking us on board? This biotechnology, there's new ways of looking at production, there's new ways of shifting away from growing a chicken and a cow to actually doing it in a lab?
Well, in December, early December, South Africa is hosting the Science Forum. So this is an area where scientists discuss about issues of sustainability and scientific responses to that. So I really think, and being a scientist, maybe I'm biased, but I think Africa should invest more in science, technology, and innovation, because Africa has one example to the West, and that is it can learn from the mistakes from the West. That's one. And it doesn't have to write off trillions of dollars of investments that we have made in the West to build the carbon-based economy. So don't do that. Save that money and go straight on the main highway. Don't stay in the dead-end road. Come back to the main highway and drive the green transformation and the digital transformation for Africa.
Professor, great way to end the interview. Thank you. So really appreciate your time.
It was a pleasure.